the result that we got from rational expectations in terms of how the economy goes through these ups and downs? What was the kind of the key result at the end of the day of what causes fluctuations from the rational expectations model? Brandon?
We overestimate and underestimate.
Yeah, we overestimate and underestimate. In other words, we screw up. And so there might not have been any way to not screw up. That's what made it rational, right? But we're kind of recognizing that there's uncertainty in the world that we cannot overcome. No matter how much data you gather, no matter how much information you get, you're going to have mistakes to be made. And so we're going to either overestimate or underestimate. And if the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates artificially lower than what they would be in a free market, the interest rate is the price of borrowed money. I mean, they're explicit about why they're doing it. Their perception is that it's good if people borrow money and then take on other projects, right? And that's kind of what we learned with part of that project. But what it's also doing is distorting the pricing system. And so Hayek talked about malinvestment. It's causing you to do investments that you might not otherwise do because the pricing system has been distorted and it's artificially low for borrowed funds. And that can cause, if everybody's borrowing because interest rates are low, we're not getting changes in what's the most productive thing, right? So when we think about limited resources, we want to try to get those resources and the economy drops out from under us. Okay, so I just wanted to make some comments here on consequences of unanticipated inflation. So we learned through rational expectations that came about through unanticipated changes in aggregate demand. And so now I want to tie that into inflation a little bit more directly. So one of the consequences is in the labor market. So in the labor market, we have a redistribution of income from who to who. So it's going to deal we were thinking inflation was going to be 3%, but it turned out to be 7%, right? So we had unanticipated inflation. Inflation was higher than we expected it to be. Who wins and who loses? When we think about the idea of redistribution, rather than the creation of wealth, which is the majority of what we do with voluntary exchange, we got both parties being made better off. When we think about redistribution, somebody's made worse off at the other person's expense. So what's going on in the labor market if we have unanticipated inflation? Inflation was higher than we thought it would be. Who wins, who loses?
The laborers lose and the employers win.
Okay, employer wins, employee loses?
Yeah.
Okay, and why is that? Somebody else. I agree. What's the idea here? What's backing that statement?
The wage rate doesn't go up. It's unexpected. The wage rate's not going to go up. The price is going to go up.
Okay, so your real wage is falling. So part of what we did when we negotiated with our employer, maybe we had a contract, maybe we had a 3% raise because we anticipated 3% inflation. But when inflation was actually 7%, we didn't ask for enough, which means the employer is benefiting at your expense because they are not paying you what they would have. Because both of you agreed, oh yeah, inflation, I read the Wall Street Journal, did you read it? Oh yeah, 3% sound good to you? 3% sounds fine, right? So they started off with an agreement between each other, a voluntary agreement, and then it was just through that uncertainty of unanticipated inflation that caused a redistribution. And again, that might be corrected later. You know, maybe the employer will say, yeah, you know what, we really screwed that one up. I will give you an extra 4% raise to keep up with inflation, right? So, but then it's that lag thing. We have output prices changing, and then it takes a while for maybe resource prices to catch up. So redistribution of income from employee to employer. And again, it was not intended. This was, so that's kind of the key here, is that it's unintended by both parties. Unintended by both parties. It's just a consequence of it. And so they may move to correct it once they learn about it. Okay, unintended by both parties. I'll add one more here. Real wage falls. The real wage for the employee falls, but that's good for the employer. Because they're now getting that money that they would have otherwise been willing to cough up, perhaps. All right. Questions on that one? Number 2, in the capital market. So in the capital market, so again, loanable funds market, we have borrowers and savers. So we have a redistribution of income from blank to blank. So now we have borrowers and lenders. Who gets helped, who gets hurt? First of all, what is their agreement? So here we have the wage as the driving force. What is the price that we're talking about here?
Interest.
We have interest, right? So we've got the interest rate is the agreed upon rate, the nominal rate of interest, little I that we've been doing the whole semester. Now, that Fisher formula told us that we can think about the interest rate being the combination of a couple things. What was it? There's like a plus sign in between here. Blank plus blank. It involved inflation. Yeah, nominal plus inflation, not quite right. And we've manipulated this equation a couple different ways, both in your homework and in class. We actually talked about it being loanable funds market. This is the real rate of interest. The real rate of interest is equal to the nominal rate minus inflation. Good. Right? So a flip way of thinking about that now, if we're not thinking about after the fact, but before the fact, real plus, not inflation, but what? If we're negotiating a contract similar to our wage situation, what are we shoving in here? The expected inflation rate. Great, right? So all this kind of deals with moving forward or moving backwards. After the fact, we can think about the real rate of return by subtracting the actual inflation rate. When we are negotiating for today for tomorrow's payments, now I've got the rate that I agree upon is dependent partially on the expected inflation rate. Knowing that inflation's 3%, and I want to earn a real rate of return of 4%, 4 plus 3 is 7. I'm going to ask you for 7%. You're going to know ahead of time that I'm really only earning 4%. I mean, that's what I wanted to do, was have purchasing power retained at a 4% level on my money. So the interest rate we agree upon is 7%. Now back to the question. If there's unanticipated inflation, there's a redistribution of income from who to who? The borrower to the lender or the lender to the borrower? Lender to the borrower. Let's see how that shakes out here. So we've got, let's say we negotiated 7%, which meant that we wanted 4% plus 3%. Right? The actual inflation rate ended up being 7%. The actual inflation rate ended up being 7%. So if we calculate the real rate of return afterwards, right? What is the real rate of return? I got 7% minus the actual return is minus 7%, gives me a real rate of return of Zippo. So who won and who lost? Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Which one?
Nobody won.
No, there's a winner. The lender. So the lender won. The borrower. Ooh, we got a debate going on. Is it the borrower? Who got the cheap money at the end of the day? Who got the cheap money? The borrower paid a real rate of return of 0%. That's pretty cheap, right? So think of it this way. When 5 years later, when they're making another payment on their loan at 7%, the lender runs to the store with that payment. Can they buy more or less goods than they were planning on? Less, or say, right, in terms of the real rate of return. But because of anticipated inflation, their purchasing power has gone down. And the way I've cooked the numbers here, they got a 0% real return on their money. So we have a redistribution from the lender to the borrower. The borrower wins. Okay, so let me just kind of highlight a little bit here. So this is the contract rate now. This is the contract nominal rate. So maybe we're doing a 5-year loan on a car or something. I don't know. So when we get that car loan, where did that come from? Well, we were expecting inflation to be 3%. And the banker wanted to get 4% on their money, and so that's why we came up with a 7 number. But afterwards, if the actual rate, if this ends up being the actual rate was 7 because of unanticipated inflation, the banker actually earns 0. This is the actual real rate. And the banker loses. Now, if the actual inflation rate ended up being 1%, the rules switch, right? So if the actual rate, if we overestimated what we thought it was going to be, then we get 7 minus 1 equals 6. The banker earned a 6% rate, but they were only wanting to earn 4, and so the borrower paid the freight that time. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right, so that's the importance of this unanticipated inflation in terms of redistributions in the system. And if you're a banker or you're a lender, it doesn't have to be a bank, but some sort of lender, and you know that the Federal Reserve tends to monkey around and tinker with things, and you don't have a lot of strong feelings that that's a good number, that it might be higher, might be low, there's a lot of volatility in it, what will you tend to do when you negotiate? Will you tend to make this a little higher or a little lower than? What side would you tend to favor if you're a lender of money and you know that there's a lot of volatility in the expected rate? You'd want it to be higher, to be more conservative, right? And so that's the powerfulness of thinking about these expectations and why Milton Friedman wanted a stable money supply. If we took that discretion away from them, and a 3% increase in the money supply led to a 3% inflation rate, then we can have a lot tighter numbers. We can be more efficient with the amount of borrowing and lending that's going on. And same thing is true with the wages. So that's maybe one other note here that we can add. If lenders are conservative and inflation is not stable, they will tend to favor a higher i.e. expected inflation. Which means rates will tend to be higher for borrowers than what they would be with stable monetary policy. This is kind of a Friedman thought. The more stability the government can interject into the system, the more efficient the transactions will be going on between employers and employees and borrowers and lenders. Landlords and tenants is another example. If you get into leasing with a residential lease, you tend to just be a year as kind of general landlord-tenant law. But when you get into commercial leasing, if you're going to be renting a commercial building to run a business, you'll a lot of times have a 5-year lease at a minimum, maybe even a 10, 15-year lease. So you're engaging in a long-term contract, partially based on inflation to be. And again, those numbers can get a little better if we have more stability in the system rather than less. Okay. Any last comments or questions there? All right, one last business cycle theory called real business cycle, RBC theory. This is a fairly newer concept. And they are more classical economists that believe markets clear pretty fast, so they'd be on board with stuff like rational expectations and stuff. So that's not a problem. They basically don't believe that the short-run aggregate supply exists. No such thing as SAS. And what we mean by that is, remember, our short-run aggregate supply curve was there by assumption. The assumption was that if we allow output prices to rise, but resource prices are frozen, then we have a movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve. Ultimately, in the long run, remember, resource prices adjusted, and we were left with just the long-run effect. So no such thing as a short-run effect means that prices, let me put no noticeable lag between output and input price adjustments. What that means is that their picture of the economy is this. And this is indeed kind of the picture of the economy that other folks that believe that markets clear pretty quickly, this is what the economy looks like. The distinction that they make is that, well, sorry, you've got something to explain. Remember, real GDP looks like this. And if I shift this aggregate demand curve, up, down, left, right, up, down, move it all around, how much is GDP moving? 0. So what they claim is that fluctuations in the economy are due to productivity shocks. That we are continuously being impinged by technology changes. New computers, new apps, new programs, new software, new trinkets, new machines, new stuff, right? The economy's kind of continuously getting, and so they don't see the long run aggregate supply curve as this stable, fixed curve. But rather it is being shocked and it's moving. So the fluctuations in the economy come from this thing moving around. And the trouble that they have with their theory to some degree is, how do we have a negative shock? If there's technology that comes along, how do we come backwards? And the argument that they make is that it causes disruptions in productivity for a company. So a couple different little anecdotal stories would be, you get a new computer system at work. Does everybody know how to use that system right away? Does it take just a one training session before they're really up to speed on it, and so the next day they're fine? No. To some companies might take a year, 2 years, whatever. It might take a while for a large organization to adapt to this technological change that occurred at their company. And so their productivity in terms of the amount of output that they get for each hour of work they put in, right? That's what productivity is. Number of units of output. If I'm an eraser marker, if I can put 100 of these off the production line, number of units of output I can put in for 8 hours of work, right? So we can look at the productivity of our labor force in terms of that. If I put in a new technology and I have to train people on that, 8 hours of work might not get me 100 erasers like it did before with the old system, right? So we're kind of going through this learning process, and technology's changing all the time. And so sometimes there's bigger shocks than others that can drag down productivity. All right, so that is where the fluctuations come from. So if you want to just put kind of a couple curves in here just to kind of motivate that, that is what's driving fluctuations in the economy, is productivity shocks. So the key point for these folks here is looking at productivity shocks. Productivity shocks cause fluctuations in long-run aggregate supply, which they would just call the aggregate supply curve, by the way. I mean, you could almost say the long-run aggregate supply is the short-run aggregate supply. I mean, there's just not a distinction. It's just the aggregate supply. So productivity shocks cause fluctuations in long-run aggregate supply. New technology. I'll put down a couple of my comments that I just said. New technology leads to people taking time to learn it. So we can think of it at the real micro level, and then we can also think of it at this this macro level of the introduction of computers. Some people argued that we didn't learn how to really start to take advantage of the internet, for instance, for about 10 years. I mean, it started off with, oh, we can do emails. Well, that's cool. So it took a while to get everybody, old people, young people, right? If you think about trying to influence the 154 million person labor force on how to use email, there's still some people that don't really know how to use email, right? So it's kind of amazing when you start to think about it. You guys are so adaptable because you're young and you grew up with it ever since you had a binky in your mouth, you've been on an iPad or something. Well, and that's where we're going, is that as those old farts start to die off, right, we've got a new group of people that have a completely different skill set to really be more efficient and more productive using today's technology. But you guys will be old farts too. And you'll be in the same position. There'll be something new that you haven't kept up with because you were comfortable with the old thing you had. And so it's always this continual process that causes lags and timing of productivity in the economy. That's what these real business cycle theory folks purport. So, questions or comments there? All right. Well, I wasn't sure if I was going to do this thing today, but I think I'm going to give it a try. So, we're getting into chapter 13, and it talks a little about voting because we're dealing with Congress and the president. We've spent time talking about the Federal Reserve, so this chapter is really dedicated to fiscal policy. So, chapter 13 deals with fiscal policy. And fiscal policy we've talked about as changes in taxes, changes in government spending. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is a democracy. What does it mean to have a democracy? Voting, okay? So that's it. That's all we have for you. So does a democracy mean that you don't have a dictatorship? So dictatorship versus what we have in the United States. So what's a dictatorship? Hunter? No, not necessarily. So what is a dictator? Because some dictators get voted in.
Just make sure they keep getting some.
There's no checks or balances, right? So all of the power resides with one person. So we don't leave Obama unchecked, right? That's why we have Congress. That's why we go through the Republicans and the Democrats and the whole voting process. So there's checks and balances. A dictator really, what he or she wants is what he or she gets. And they can just kind of, they really hold all the power. And so places have had a democracy with a dictatorship. But conveniently enough, if you are the dictator, when the votes come in, what might you choose to do? Change them all to you, yes. And so that's why dictators tend to be a little sticky in their position and have these long runs, is that there's kind of and you'll see this around the world, there's kind of this illusion that there's a democracy and that the people are voting him or her into position. But in reality, there's corruption going on, and so it's all just, the votes are fixed. Okay, so that's one thing to note here. So democracy is a system of electing by vote, right? So we've got voting. Let's just put that. Typically, we do it how? We don't have to do it this way, but typically, who wins when we have a vote? With the most votes, how many? Majority, which is how many? 50, a little over 50%, right? 50-50 is a tie, but if you're a little bit over, then you got it. So voting by majority is typically how we do it. By the way, what's the underlying reason why we tend to have voting by majority?
They're supposed to represent the best, what the people want.
Okay, so in general, yeah, we've got 100 people, and so that seems fair if everybody gets a chance to vote, that at least over 50% wanted it that way, even if the other 49% disagreed, right? So we got this notion of fairness out of this somehow. So voting by majority, maybe some sort of notion of fairness, whatever that means, right? A notion of fairness, kind of at least the majority of people feel this way, and so maybe you don't feel as bad about going along with it, even though you were in the minority. You still feel like, oh well, we did our best to try, right? Okay, so I've got a little exercise. Let's see, how many are we going to do here? So let's do a little example here. I'm going to give you two distributions. Two distributions of income. We'll put income in quotes. One distribution, D1, looks like this. We've got 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many do I want to do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I did do 10. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I've got another distribution, D2, that looks like this. We've got 2 times 10 is 20. How about 19, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. In a democracy, would you expect this outcome? In a democracy, would you expect this outcome for distribution? Which outcome seems more fair? Which outcome to you feels more fair? Number one, right? So we got Bill Gates here with every. Which distribution would we expect? 1 or 2? 1, you'd kind of think, right? Okay. So now I need some volunteers here. Let's take one person from each row. I'll just do. I don't know if I grabbed enough. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, oops, 8, 9. All right, come on up. I'm going to be number 10. I'm going to be number 10. So come on up to, let's all kind of line up here. Let's all kind of line up here. All in order, kind of like our little distribution. I'll stay here. Okay, so we're gonna have a little vote, and I have the privilege of being the president or the agenda setter, right? So I'm gonna do a series of votes, and I do have some rules for you to follow. That's in the model of self-interest in economics. Basically, if you benefit from it, if you get at least one more wristband, then you're going to vote thumbs up for that redistribution, right? So for that distribution, you're going to vote thumbs up. If you lose bands, so if you go from anything less than what you have, then you're against it. And if you have no change, then you just abstain. You don't care, right? It doesn't affect you personally, so you don't care. All right. So let's have a little vote. I'm going to propose. Kamisha, you're leaving already? Wait, stay up. Stay up.
Because I grabbed one.
Yeah.
Like, we passed it down.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I did need two. I was wondering when I thought. Okay, yeah, you passed them. Got it. All right, so now we have 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm 10. All right. Gabe, this is what I'm proposing. 2 from this guy, 2 from this guy, 2 from here, and 2 from here. And then we're just going to do, there you go, there you go. Well, I'll hold on to 1, 2. How many people are in favor of this redistribution? Raise your hand. Those opposed? Sorry. Motion passes. We are all set. All right, so now I'm thinking I'm going to grab this many and this many, and then I'm just going to give there, and there. All right, so the new distribution, you two have what you have. How many people are in favor of this vote? Say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Nay. All right, so motion carries. No, that you guys are out because no change to you, remember? So if you have 0 and you didn't have any loss, then you're out. So motion carries. All right, so let's see. I like these. These look kind of good. Oh wait, I can't do, I'm too far here, aren't I? Well, actually, I could come back over here and over here. And so this is the new redistribution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, so let's see here. I think I'll take maybe these. And come over here, and I keep the rest. Those in favor of this new distribution, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Right?
Now bigger than our balance.
So, it's possible through majority rule to get exactly what we didn't want to get. Right? Depends on who's got the power, who sets the agenda. You can get results that don't look so desirable on the outside. All right, you guys can take your seats. Thank you. Oh, I like it at the end of the day when I've got everything. So, the moral of the story is sometimes we take too much comfort in democracy that sounds fair as long as we all have input, right? Everybody had input. Now some of the assumptions of this model that I had though was that those who had 0 kept with 0 and didn't vote, right? So then that might be a stretch. If we start to see things not being fair and we allowed all the 0 people to vote, then maybe they would jump in and be against that redistribution. So that was part of it. But are there people out there that choose not to be informed about issues? Is that pretty common? Yeah. It's called rational ignorance, right? So you choose to stay ignorant about the situation because it's too costly to get information. That takes time. That takes maybe even money to learn about the issues. And so those of us who stay rationally ignorant, stay out of the voting process, then we might get some outcomes that aren't very desirable. All right, so this is kind of similar in a way to the pork barreling thing we saw in the video, but it's usually kind of an eye-opener, isn't it? That we could actually use a democracy, a majority rule system, and get something so wrong as this by sticking to majority rule. And so it's very possible to get some inefficient results by relying too much on majority rule. And so that's the first thing I wanted to open the door on, because that's how, of course, all of our politicians get into office. We kind of believe in this majority rule system. It's possible that it works just fine, by the way, if we don't have rational ignorance. If we have fully informed voters, then there's a lot of economic models that would show we wouldn't get to this if people stay informed on the issues. But the problem is, I think in many circumstances, self-interest rules the roost, which is the baseline assumption that we take. It's not that you don't care about other people. Self-interest doesn't mean selfish, but you care about things that are more important and more closer to you, whatever you choose to be engaged in. That's really at the heart of self-interest, and that can lead to some problems in the voting booths. All right, we will see you on Monday.